Welcome, Education 355, to week 3 of our term together. Let's take a few minutes to look at our syllabus and see what our learning outcomes are this week and what tasks you'll be completing as we navigate through this week together. Going through the syllabus, if we go down to week 3, you will see our learning outcomes are about outlining, defining, and creating tools for 6 traits of writing, relating instructional procedures or the writing traits to current classrooms and practices, and then also applying those 6 traits to writing a poetry piece. You'll be reading in your textbook chapters 3 and 7, and that will be in your teaching writing textbook. You'll be working in your interactive notebook, completing your discussion board prompt, and then you will have your student writing piece also. So going back into your course where we see, my apologies, week 3. So here you will see your discussion board, your interactive notebook rubric, so you can refer to that even though you've already built, established, and shared your notebook. Here's the rubric so that you know what is expected this week. Your poetry writing rubric, and then also the link to submit your poetry piece. So looking at the discussion board, we're really focusing on the 6 traits of writing. So in your textbook, in chapter 3, we see on page 58 a nice little chart that explains the 6 traits of writing. So we have ideas, organization, voice and word choice, sentence fluency, conventions, and presentation. Those are the 6 traits of writing that a lot of schools and programs have adopted, and it's a way to kind of break down the pieces of writing and tackle in a sequential order or based on what the needs are. So if students are strong in organization but weak in voice, you can target your feedback and your instruction for those students on their voice. So on page 58 you will see a great figure 3.1, that shares those as well as what the writers should be doing within each of those traits and then what the impact is. And so once we develop those students to be proficient in that trait, the impact that it will have. Also, in chapter 3, on page 71, this chapter speaks to interactive read-alouds. Especially when you are implementing mini lessons and instruction based on the 6 traits, interactive read-alouds are a really impactful way to kind of make that point even more resonate with the students. So having a book that you have chosen ahead of time because it's an example of that trait or that strategy that you may be working on, and taking that and making sure that you have read the book ahead of time. You've made some notes about where you want to make certain points along the way as you're reading it aloud to the students. And you're being intentional about making it interactive. So it's not a everybody sit down together on the carpet and I'm going to read this from cover to cover and you just kind of sit and listen. It is intentional about seeking their input, seeking their feedback. And so they are having conversations and partner conversations that allow them to reflect on what's happening and apply whatever the trait may be or the skill may be or the strategy may be, because it's a part of that book and it's, that book is a model for that. So interactive read-alouds are an amazing strategy that fit right into your mini lesson. And something else to remember for an interactive read-aloud is you don't have to read the entire book. If there's, it could be a picture book that is not very long, but you just want to pull a little piece out of it because that piece really connects to what you're trying to teach and your content that you're trying to put across in your lesson. So just know that also, that just because you're doing an interactive read-aloud doesn't mean you have to read the book from cover to cover. Then I want you to look in your chapter 3 at page 73 where they speak a little bit to word walls. And so I just want to make a point that that's there for you because oftentimes word walls are not used as intended and they're just kind of put up on a bulletin board and we put our alphabet letters up and then we put words on the wall and they just sit there. So a word wall is meant to be built together. And so it's not something that, in August you're putting all of your grade level words on the word wall and then you refer to it as that content is relevant in your instruction. The students need to see that as a resource and as a tool. So if you are adding words as they're becoming relevant in the discussion and in your instruction, then they remember that we've talked about that, we added it to the word wall, and I know where that is on the word wall. They can remember that whole process and that visual. So just take a few minutes to take a look at that on page 73 and just read a little bit about best practices with word walls, because not everyone necessarily implements that the correct way, and it's something that's really a tremendous tool for students to be able to build their fluency and vocabulary. So this week also we are going to be talking about the genre of poetry. And so that is what your student writing piece is going to be about. But before that, in looking at chapter 7, there are many, many different types of poems. So, there's probably at least a handful of different types of poems. So you have your formula poems, and those are kind of more typical, more of what your students are used to. You have free verse poems, you have syllable and word count poems, rhymed verse poems, model poems. There's an endless list. So I want you to know that as you're working on your writing piece, you're going to choose one of those types of poems. But what I also want you to look at is on page 168, looking at the poetic devices. And so poetry is more than just the format of the poem that you're writing, and it's more than just the type of poem you're writing, but it's really about the words that you are choosing to put in that poem and the power of the words. Poetry is typically not something, it's shorter, and so you are more intentional about the words that you're choosing. So in looking at poetic devices, we're looking at alliteration, comparison, onomatopoeia, personification, repetition, rhyme. So those are things that, you are choosing words that serve a purpose and that are meaningful and that take it to a deeper level. If I'm just writing kind of general, simple things, I can really take it to a whole nother level by using a personification where I'm really using words that bring life to the poem. And so as you are working on your poetry piece, just remember those on page 168, those poetic devices, and we'll look and see where that's relevant as we're looking at your rubric. So let's look at your discussion board post, since we've talked a little bit about the 6 traits. So which of the 6 traits do you feel is most relevant to your grade level and why? If you are currently not in a grade level, either as a TA or for field experience or whatever it may be, if you're not currently there, I just want you to choose a grade level of your preference. So maybe one you've had in a field experience before, or maybe one just that you prefer. So choose one of the 6 traits that you feel is most relevant for that grade level. And then keeping that trait in mind and that grade level in mind, look at some writing samples of students in your classroom. What trait do your students seem to struggle with the most? And why do you believe that's a common area of weakness for your students? And so again, if you're not in a grade level or in a school, I want you to just search for writing samples. So it's easy to access student writing samples. So again, remembering the grade level that you're choosing in question 1, just do a search for some writing samples for that grade level. And then just take a look and see what you're feeling like in that writing sample is the trait that is the weakest, I guess you could say. So speak to that a little bit. Again, remember that you are posting. You have to reply to 2 colleagues' posts, and then you are citing evidence from the text. Usually that will be happening in your post, but you can also cite evidence in your reply also. All right, our interactive notebook this week So remember that you have created that and shared that with me. Your interactive notebook gives you a template to speak about the 6 traits of writing. So this is the blank page that you have been given for the 6 traits of writing, and then we go back in here and we look at our interactive notebook rubric, and we look at 6 traits. Here's what you're expected to do. So you have identified the 6 traits. You have defined the 6 traits. You have corresponding components of the 6 traits are identified. They're represented visually, and the impact is defined. And so again, remember that table that we talked about in chapter 3. So remember that you are wanting the visual representation. We want to make sure that we are able to provide that, one, so that we remember better, but also so that we're able to, when we're in the field, in the classroom, anytime you're able to connect something to a visual representation, allows the students to recall it better. And that's kind of the whole point behind the word wall. If they're visually seeing that we're adding things to the word wall and that that's a resource, it kind of just resonates and sits and registers with them a little bit better. So as you are working on your interactive notebook, make sure that you are keeping the information there simple, clean, and making some sort of visual connection. So you can, the layout is however you want, but make it meaningful and something that you would use in your practice. All right, and then finally your poetry piece. You'll be connecting some of those 6 traits, and again I listed them there in this top descriptive piece, and the types of poetry writing. So at the beginning of chapter 7, remember we spoke about the different types of poems, and so you're going to be connecting those 6 traits and the types of poems. And within your poem, you'll be using poetic devices. So we're kind of taking all 3 of those big pieces and we're putting it into one poetry piece. You can submit it any way that you think fits the criteria below. I'm not going to specify what type of poem or what poetic device I want you to use. That is absolutely your choice. But remember that the topic is anything that you choose. It's your piece of writing. It's something from your perspective. And so make sure that this is not something that you're writing from an elementary perspective or from a student perspective. It's for you. But make sure that you are checking this rubric. So make sure that you have identified one of those 4 types of poetry. You are somehow using 3 of the 6 traits, and we'll talk about how you share that and how you let me know about that. And the same for poetic devices. You're choosing at least 2. And then really what you'll probably end up needing to do is you will submit a 2-page document, the first page being your poem itself, and then the second page being just a quick little reflection to let me know what are the 3 traits that you used and what are the 2 poetic devices that you used. So if you feel like within your poem it's easy to identify those 3 traits and 2 devices, you don't have to do the reflection piece. But if there's any doubt or any worry that I may not be able to pick that up, I would definitely recommend that you just type up a quick little paragraph to let me know. And then of course that your writing is engaging and grammatically correct, easy to read, does not have distracting errors. So that is your poetry piece that you are going to be working on and submitting. I think that is it for this week. So you have your chapter 3 and 7, your interactive notebook, your discussion board, and your actual poetry writing piece this week. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Thank you, and I'll see you in week 4.